right, well, welcome everyone. We'll go ahead and get started because it is actually 5:02. But welcome to the GradTrack workshop, also in conjunction with the Chemistry Colloquium series. We're here today to talk a little bit about presentations and about best practices for creating your presentations and making really good presentations. So my name is Chelsea Stripling. I'm one of the instruction librarians over at Evans Library. And again, this workshop is a part of the GradTrack program. So with GradTrack through the library, we have started to promote personalized individual services to help you guys with your grad degrees. So we know you have a long road ahead of you with researching and studying and coursework. So we're here to help you from the library to anyway succeed in your coursework and your research and your studies. So GradTrack is a part of that. These workshops that we offer each semester are, again, one part of GradTrack. We also have consultations to help you with your research and your projects. We also have a graduate-only study room in the library on the 4th floor. It's room 401. So if you're interested in using that graduate-only study space, just stop by the front desk at the library. You'll get a code to use for the room. So again, we've tried to listen and offer you guys the things that you're really interested in seeing. So on that note, if you have suggestions for us about what to add to GradTrack or what we can offer for you, please let us know, because we're always happy to help you in whatever way we can. So this evening we have with us Kim Shivler. Kim is a speaker and a communication strategist and an instructional design consultant. She helps companies to create powerful presentations, effective teams, and student-focused workshops and online courses. So Kim has over 20 years of experience teaching technology and business, including working as a part of IBM's worldwide technical sales team. So she is here to share some of her fantastic expertise with us. So if you wouldn't mind helping me, please welcome Kim.
Thank you. Whatever we do, whether it's just in front of a class or defending our dissertation or having to go get a job, presentation is a part of it, right? And for a lot of us, presentation can be a little nerve-wracking. Not everybody wakes up in the morning like I do and goes, oh, I'm getting on stage today. A lot of people are like, oh dear God, don't make me do that. And yet, it's funny because all of us, all of you, you guys amaze me. Scientists are my favorite people in the whole world. Because I believe you guys are the ones who are going to save the world. You're the ones who find the answers. And the rest of us want to know the answers. So we need you to be able to present them to us. Today, let's dig into what can make our presentations more powerful. Allow us to get that message across. So whether or not we're just inspiring our peers or trying to get a grant, or if any of you are going into corporate, trying to sway a CEO to understand what you're doing, this is what we can learn. And it's not magic. Yes, there are some outlier freaks like me who just love to do this. But you don't have to love to do this to learn to be good at it. So let's look at some of those. And I hope some of these ideas are things you haven't learned before, because there's some things we've all learned. Today we're going to talk about 3 things: visuals, our presentation skills, and our audience. Because guess what, folks? That audience is so important. And sometimes we forget them. We get all wrapped up in what we want to talk about, what we just found out. And yet, if we can't connect with the audience, it falls flat. And to me, that's the saddest thing in the whole world. Because again, you guys are finding the stuff that the rest of us want to know. Now, wrapped in all of this, but what I'm not really talking about a lot today, is you gotta have quality content. And you guys are experts, so I know you have quality content. We're going to hit on a few of those points. But because we have an hour, I had to pick on the things I know most people want to work on or need to work on. And the content itself may not be that. I have just a couple things to say about content for you. One, we're going to pull it all back to audience. Make sure you know your audience and you build the content for them. When we're speaking to our peers, it's the easiest. We know we can geek out together on those little things we like to talk about. But again, if we have to talk to CEOs or we're trying to get a job or maybe we're defending a thesis and this person isn't really in our department but they have to approve, we need to make sure it's at their level. The other tip I give you, I worked with a software engineer a few days ago. If you ever have writer's block, I don't know, any of you guys ever sit down and you know your stuff, but you're sitting there at the computer and it's just not coming? Okay. Turn on your recorder, your voice recorder on your phone or your computer, stand up and talk it out, because you know your stuff. Talk it out, get your transcript. We did this with this guy, had a beautiful draft for exactly what he was trying to create. Because he knew how to present it to his customers. He was a consultant. He just couldn't get it on the page. So today we're not handling content heavy, but all of this ties into content. The visuals, the presentation skills, and understanding our audience. Let's start with visuals. Because visuals is where most people come to me initially. Like, oh, I gotta build my slides. You know why everybody loves building their slides? Because it's much easier than dealing with the presentation skills. Getting up on your feet and thinking about what am I gonna present. But we do wanna make sure our slides are right. The first thing to know is your aspect ratio. Are we a 4:3 or a 16:9? Boring, technical, but we need to know it. Because if I do a 4:3, which is kind of like your old TV. Any of you guys remember 35 millimeter? And I build 16:9, which is widescreen, it will go off the screen. And depending on where the wall is, you may or may not see it at all. Sadly, I was presenting at a conference in Sacramento a few months ago, and a man was delivering one of the best presentations I'd ever heard on internet security. But it was one of the 4:3s, which are the most common, I find, in hotel rooms, conference rooms, that type of thing, business centers. And he had done them all 16:9. We got to see this much of what he was trying to share with us. And sadly, he hadn't done the other thing I'm going to talk to you about today, which is make your slides just complement your presentation. They are not your presentation. We are not giving everybody a book. You want to give them a book? Write a book. But when you want to give them a presentation, your slides need to complement the presentation. They are there to listen to you, not to read a bunch of slides. Which brings in the text. Make your text big, at least 35 point. Most of what you see here is 40, 50, 60, and 70 point. Biggest mistake I see from almost everybody I work with is this slide of all this little text and no one can read it. And if they can read it, are they paying attention to you or are they trying to figure out that text? We're not giving them a book. No more than 3 bullets. And make sure your colors contrast. Sometimes designers like to give us things like a pale gray, which doesn't show up. We're going for contrast. If I want you to read it, I do want you to be able to read it. But I don't want you sitting here just reading lines and lines and lines of text. I work with software engineers a lot. I've had guys give me 3,500 lines of code crammed in at this speed. Like, no one can read that. So this should complement us, be large enough that it's just a place marker. Now, the challenge you'll run into with that is that so many conferences, they want to use your slides as your handout. This is your handout. No, this is not my handout. These are my slides. Give them a separate handout. I have one for you today. Yeah, the text is way smaller than I would put on a slide. And when I want you to have more, because I didn't have unlimited budget for printing, I have a link for you to go to tomorrow for a downloadable PDF of everything else I'm going to talk about. Don't try to shove that into your slides. It's not efficient or effective. The other thing I really want to warn you about, we've talked about this a little bit today, because we had a few technical difficulties up here if you saw us. Do not depend on your slides to deliver your presentation. Because one of these days, that projector's going to fail. I was speaking at a conference in Sacramento a few years ago. They could not get the projector to work. 200 people are sitting in the room looking at me. I can't just stand there all afternoon. I left the podium and let them fix it, and I went ahead with the presentation. 10, 15 minutes in, they got it fixed. I jumped over, caught up with the slides, and we kept going. But I would have had to cut 15 minutes out of the presentation and not delivered what I needed to deliver if I had been dependent on those slides. So never be dependent on them. And today we're going to give you some tips on how you don't have to. Now you're like, wow, she's telling me how to do all this stuff. How do I do that? On our charts, another thing. Right now we're just on the text piece. We're on the slide piece. The reason I picked this one is this actually came from a professional slide company. So don't think just because you bought this for 50 bucks, it's a good slide. It's not. Now we're a small room here. This is a beautiful auditorium. It's a raised platform, which makes it easier for you to see the screen. But there are times you might have to speak at a conference and it's a flat room of 300 people, and that guy back there can't see any of this. Happened to me 2 weeks ago at a business meeting here in Melbourne. A bigwig at an aerospace company. No one could read. There was 300 people in the back. So we're going to get rid of all this little text. We're going to make sure our charts make sense. One thing I love when I work with scientists, you guys do make your charts make sense. It's my business people that just like to pop things up there that have nothing to do with anything. But what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of the little text, the series 1, series 2, series... This is not it. What we're going to do instead is just put the chart up there. Our blue, red, and green. Did you notice there was even a yellow there that's not even on the chart? What was that all about? This is just going to be our descriptors of what people are looking at. And now I've got a much more effective slide that people can read and understand. It all really boils down to communication and doing it in the right way. Now that's just slides. This is a beautiful room. Look at all these whiteboards. Ooh, I like whiteboards. And there are times when you may want to draw or write on the whiteboard. Well, now we've got another thing to think about. This room is probably getting too big for that. I was in an incredible speech a week ago at another aerospace company, and the engineer was using the whiteboard beautifully. Guess what? There were 10 people in the room. He was over there drawing, and it was great because we could all see it. But if I'm drawing here, you may not be able to see it in the back. And if you have 500 people, you will not be able to see it in the back. What do I want to do in that case? Well, there is a workaround. First, just using the whiteboard, one of the things this guy did very well is he kept himself open. He drew and he talked, but he wasn't completely facing away from everybody. Now, don't ever let anyone say to you, you can never turn your back on an audience. Because if that was true, we wouldn't have theater in the round. You can, but you don't want to stay there. We always want to come back and engage with everybody. But in a case like this, if you want to use a whiteboard or a flip chart, and you need to draw things out, you need to do one of two things to make it very effective. One is, if you're in a really big arena, a lot of conference centers, they will have tech guys to work with you. They can actually put a camera on what you're doing and put it out to, sometimes when I speak, there's 2 screens at the front and then 2 screens way back and then 2 screens later. And they can actually camera that or film that and put it to those screens. If they can't do that, what I'm going to recommend you do is to go ahead and do it on a slide and just draw the little pieces as you explain it. Right? So draw one piece, explain that, add the next slide that adds the next piece and explain that. Because there's nothing worse than completely losing your audience because they just can't see what you're doing. Now, as we move through that, we also want to just quickly touch on, I don't have a slide for this because that's another thing. Only have a slide if it really needs the slide. You don't have to have a slide for every little sentence you say. Right? So 2 other things as we leave visual. One is if you want to have a video, work with your AV guys. Or if you're in a case where you're going to use your own laptop, be very careful that they may not have audio that can pick that up. If you're just showing video, you're okay, but their audio may not pick that up for any type of audio. Also beware of copyright. I'm not a lawyer, but make sure, just because you're allowed to watch YouTube at home does not mean you can present it to 200, 300, 500 people legally. And they do come after people. So be careful of that. Again, I would ask my attorney on that one. Huh?
Ask the librarian.
Ask the librarian. See, she will tell you. She knows these things. And it's really important. The other thing is never, ever, ever depend on the internet to work in a conference room. Especially if you're at a big convention center or hotel ballroom. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Always have a backup plan. I teach software. It's really nice when I'm speaking in front of a group and I can log into the website and show you what I'm doing with this online learning platform. I create a screen flow, which is just the software I use to do my screen grabs, and I do the whole thing just as though I were doing it on the internet, and it's on my little hard drive. And when the internet doesn't work, I push the button. It has no audio. I talk through it as though I was doing that. Because what you don't want to be doing is standing there going, but I needed the internet. And it's not working. That's just one of those things. You know Murphy's Law, folks, right? If it will fail, if it can fail, it will. When it comes to presentations, always count on that being the truth. Let's move on. Speaking of which. So let's talk a little bit about our presentation skills. As I said, we have to kind of go through these a little fast. The visuals we've gotten out of the way, but what about our presentation skills? What can we do to really bring this home for people? Well, the first one is the speaking itself. You guys you have the content. You are the ones we want to listen to. Please, make us want to listen. There's this little thing called vocal variety. You may have picked it up in my voice. I don't always speak in one single tone. Have you ever been in a presentation? I had a professor in college, and just every single thing was the same thing, and he just wanted us to know that this was how we said aluminium in the UK, and it was geology, and within 10 minutes we were all asleep. Now the sad thing is, I loved geology. I wanted to know everything that man had to say. But I couldn't hear it. So make sure that you're giving your presentation in a way that people can hear. And what's funny is, none of us speak that way when we talk to each other. If you and I are talking, you're going to have a natural cadence to the way you speak. Why do some people lose that when they get on stage? I don't know. Make sure you don't, because we want to hear. I want to hear what you have to say. That's a lot of our speaking. The next is moving. Engage your audience. Move towards them if you can. Now, sometimes you can't. They have been so lovely here. They have me set up where there's a microphone that can pick me up, and I can walk around and talk to you and engage with you. And if you can, do it. I will warn you though, sometimes you go to a conference, they have a microphone right here. If you get any further than this far away, they can't hear you. In that case, you do what you do. You gotta stand there and be tethered. You may have to try to walk around a little bit, do something interesting, but you will have to work with it. But if you don't have that liability, move. But don't move just because you're nervous. Have you ever seen anyone who talk like this? And they're giving the speech and they're just going like this? And you don't know, and you're so worn out by the end of the speech and you haven't even done anything. That's nerves, folks. And that's not what we want to do. I saw a speech last week and the guy, one of his first speeches, lovely kid, and he talked like this the whole time. For 10 minutes, I got to watch this. I thought we were going to salsa dance. We're not dancing, we're speaking. And we want our movement to match what we say. Move when it makes sense to move. And do what my mentor says, stand and land when you have a big point you want to get to. But that movement's important. And then the next one, body language. Again, hand motions that are about connection, that fit with what you're talking about, maybe pointing to your slides if that's it. What fits? Facial expressions, eye contact. Now this is a beautiful training room, let me tell you. I can see all the way to the back and see your eyes. Lovely. If you're ever in a big theater with the lights on your face, you can't see past right here. You're the only two I can see. Don't let them know that. Sometimes speakers, they just focus on those two people because they're the only ones they can see. Guess what? 90% of your audience probably doesn't know that. They haven't been on that stage with the bright lights in their face. So you look back and make contact with that guy and that guy. Even though maybe all you see is a shadow. And sometimes in big theaters, nothing. But you make that contact, because guess what? They think you just made contact. Hey! They have the connection. Because we're not sitting around thinking, she can't see back this far. Unless you're another professional speaker. And then they're like, cool, knows what you're doing. All good. Those are 3 keys. Now, what happens to me with some people when they haven't spoken before is they look at that and they go, okay. How do I get there? That seems like a life. Last time I spoke was in front of my freshman class, and it really wasn't good because my English teacher made me. What we do now is we rehearse. We rehearse to the ends of the earth. I'm going to give you a little secret. Most people don't like rehearsal. My mentor says it's because it's messy. Even most professional speakers who are paid thousands and thousands of dollars to get on a stage, many of them don't like to rehearse because it's messy. It's when you find out like, oh God, that didn't work. I spent all this time, I'm writing it, I'm testing it. It didn't work. But that's where the magic happens. Rehearsal is where the magic happens. You don't want to walk in front of an audience and have that be the first time you did something. Oh, good night. I've not only delivered this speech before, I have rehearsed it for the last 3 days, hour upon hour, because you're my new special audience, not the same audience that I delivered it to 2 months ago. when we rehearse, when we learn our stuff, we find out what doesn't work. We also get more comfortable. Are there any of you who sometimes are a little nervous about getting on stage? Anybody here like, I don't know if I really want to do that. I'm not that crazy lady who wakes up in the morning going, give me the stage. The more we rehearse, the more we get to know our stuff, the better chance we have of not being as nervous. Oh, I'm not going to tell you we're not nervous. All right? Even this crazy lady who loves the stage, I was nervous coming here today. I was nervous coming here today because I found out yesterday that a good friend of mine from way back in high school is part of this program. And I'm thinking, whoa, that's nerve-wracking. It's one thing to get up in front of a whole bunch of strangers, but to get up in front of someone who I've got history with, that's kind of scary. So we can all get nervous sometimes, but rehearsal is going to help us. Now, one of the things I want to share with you about rehearsal, have any of you ever heard to rehearse in front of a mirror? Has anybody ever heard that? Please don't. Please don't do that. Back in the day, they used to say, rehearse in front of the mirror. You'll see how people see you. No, you won't. We don't see how other people see us when we look in the mirror. We're looking at ourselves like, do I look good? No, I got to change that up. No, that didn't come out right. I got to change that up. No, don't do that. The other thing happens when you're in front of a mirror is you will be constrained. You will be constrained to the mirror. You won't see yourself if you're that guy pacing back and forth across the stage, back and forth across the stage, because you're constrained to the mirror. This is 2018, folks. Videotape yourself. You know, that adage started back before, back like 35 millimeter cameras when my grandfather had home movies, and it wasn't easy. Everybody now either has one of these, cell phone with camera, or you can get a digital camera for almost nothing. Videotape yourself, because then you will see what other people see. You know the other thing you'll do? You'll hear what other people hear. Have you ever noticed that your voice in your head does not sound like your voice on a recording? Yeah? Like, my voice in my head sounds really good when I sing. I've heard it on a recording. I will spare you. Okay? But that's when you see what you really look like, what you hear, what you really look like. When you find out that little tick that you have that you just wish you didn't have. Mine is I tap my foot. I've been pretty good tonight. I've caught myself just once or twice. But I tap my foot, and I watch it, and I work on it. You might find if you are someone who's a little nervous, you kind of pull in like this. Ever seen a speaker kind of talk like this? Because they're nervous. They're closing off. It allows you to see what you really are doing and make that presentation that much better by stopping. So, no more in the mirror, always on video. 2 more tips to go along with that. Use your visuals. Make sure they're working with the flow of what you're saying. Because sometimes they're not. I can't tell you how many times I'm trying something and it wasn't working, and oh, that slide's got to go. I don't want to do that in front of a live audience. I want to do that before I get there. Use your visuals. And then the other thing is wear your costume. Just a fancy way of saying whatever the heck you're going to wear in front of your audience, wear it. Because if you're used to, like me, I work out of my house. I wear jeans, fuzzy slippers, and I'm a podcaster t-shirt every day. That's how I go to work. Unless I'm shooting, and then I put on a nice shirt with my jeans and my fuzzy slippers that no one can see. But then if I get into a suit and a jacket and it feels different, people can see that. If you're guys with suits, a lot of times you're not used to wearing a suit, all of a sudden you start like putting your hands in the pockets. Don't you do that. No hands in pockets. No, nothing in pockets, folks. Men or women. None. We don't do that. So we want to rehearse in those clothes so we know we're comfortable. for the women in the room, if you like to wear high heels, by God, rehearse in those. Now really, flat is recommended. Flat shoes are recommended, or low heels. Because you get ladies and they're on these heels, and all of a sudden they start looking kind of wobbly. So if you're going to speak in those, please make sure you rehearse. But this is just critical to it. It's also, if you ever have really, really squeaky shoes, eek, eek. Have you ever heard somebody go squeak, eek, eek, eek? I have to laugh. I was rehearsing in a pair of boots that I wear most of the time with these pants. And I guess the heels come loose. Because as I was rehearsing, I was hearing this, I'm like, no, the first row doesn't want to hear it. So rehearse in what you're going to actually wear. You'll be amazed at how it helps you feel when you get there, because you're ready. You are in character and ready to go for your audience. So how about that audience? Who is that audience? And how are we going to care for them? I mentioned it earlier. If we're speaking for our peers, it's so much easier. When I teach software and I get with one of my software developers that they're building out a new feature for one of the programs I teach, we can geek out all day on what that feature's going to do and how cool it is and isn't this neat. But what happens if I need to present to a customer that software? If I want to get a job around that software, if I want to talk to anybody that is not as in love with the bells and features and whistles of that software, I will lose them right away. This is particularly true if any of you, I don't know if any of you are going into corporate and you might have to talk to a CEO at some point, or if you are even staying in academia but you have to talk to someone who's not as techie as you are. They tend to be big picture. Now we have these personality styles tests. We have DISC and Myers-Briggs and all these, if any of you have ever had to take one. If you haven't yet, if you ever go to corporate America, you probably will. And they're certainly not 100% accurate. They're stereotypes in a lot of ways. But they do nail specific things. Some of us like details. We like just the facts, man. Give me the facts, give them to me all day long, and that's what I want. Some of us, particularly the CEO types, they want the big picture. Start giving them facts, and they're off on the next cloud in their head. They are not with you anymore. So we need to make sure we can identify who is actually in our audience and present what we want to present in a way that reaches them so that we can get, honestly, whatever it is we want. Are we looking for a job? Are we looking for funding? Are we looking for a grant? Are we looking for a sale? Some of us maybe go into a corporate technical sales type position, which was a lot of my background. When I was with IBM, I was not front run. I was not a front line salesperson. I was a technical evangelist. That meant that I stood between engineering and sales and translated between the two. If any of you remember Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I was the babblefish for those two. But if you're going to be that, if you have to talk that language, you have to teach yourself to make sure you're hitting those points. Your librarians can help you with that because they do think in those terms. We have a rule in our house. My other half and I are both spent many years in software. He owns a computer consulting company. And when we're working with a new piece of technology and we're gonna have to go talk to a CEO level, that decision level, does it pass the mother test? Right? Neither of our mothers are technical. My mother is so non-technical. My brother and I, who were both in IT, took away her PC, gave her a Mac, and bought her a ticket to the geniuses at the Apple Bar. I've gone there with her. She walks in and they're like, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Bell," because they know she's got 9 million questions. So what our ticker is, if we can deliver a message that our mother can understand, what the problem is, what the solution is, and how we solve it, then we know we can get through to that CEO. So for you, as you rehearse, as you find your messages, what I suggest you do is figure out what's your mother test? Who's the person you would need to get through to? And you know what? Invite them into the rehearsal. Let some of those people in, and do not, whatever you do though, don't say, "Did you like that? How was it?" No. Ask them specific questions to see that they understood what you were talking about. Because that's going to let you know, did you get through to them? Because the easiest ones to talk to are the people we're already like-minded with. But there's always going to be a time as we move up the chain where we have someone who's not quite in that circle, and we need to be able to get through to them. That's very critical. Now, I'd like to open it up for questions, workshopping, anything you would like help with. No questions? Yes, sir.
What would be your first response to an unexpected and difficult question?
That one is very specific because it's going to depend on the unexpected and difficult question, right? So sometimes, that's a great way to start, because sometimes a difficult question might just be sabotage. You know, I don't know about you guys, I've been in some pretty heated ones where it really was someone being very pointed, think political discussion, right? And if it's that, I'm going to deflect it. I'm not going to come back at them if it's a very pointed sabotage type question at my thesis or my idea. I'm going to deflect it gently and then give them an answer about what my philosophy is, what my findings are, what my science is, whatever that is. If it's just unexpected in the fact that, dang, I hadn't thought of that before, you're allowed to pause. That is one thing speakers make an assumption of, that they're not quite right. You don't have to talk the whole time you're up here. You're allowed to pause. Let me think about that for a minute. Now, there are times when I've had to get back to somebody, particularly if it's a highly technical, specific question about a piece of software that I just don't know. I have to say, we're coming out with a new product. I don't know that yet. Let me get your card and get back to you. Because there's sometimes that. Getting back to someone's okay. We don't have to know every answer. If it is just one, though, like I say, where you haven't thought it through, pause for a minute. It's okay. Pause, think it through, and answer it. And it may not even be a definitive answer. Sometimes mine is, well, I think I would try it this way. So I had a question in a communications seminar up in St. Augustine in the fall. And the man said, okay, I've got this situation. We've got a group of project managers, group of engineers. They're supposed to finish a project. They're not doing it at all because they're fighting over everything. How do I solve that? Well, I couldn't immediately solve it. So what I said is, well, and we were in one of those styles assessments type classes, just so you know what we were looking at. So I think that's a case where I would bring in a facilitator and have a facilitator sit between the two of them, the same way I used to do between engineering and marketing and sales, and help define it. I didn't have the definitive answer that would work, but that's the way I would approach it. And sometimes that's just how we have to answer questions is how we would try it, knowing that there's not a 100% chance that it will work, because I don't know about you guys, but I have very few 100% chances of anything.
So one of the things I would like you to comment on is the timing, because one of the biggest problems I see with even professional speakers, very reputed speakers, they want to say so many things, they want to put a lot of slides, and then in the end they start speeding through them. Of course, they lose the audience there. So do you have a sort of a guide, sort of a rough estimate of how many slides should go in a, say, in a 45-minute talk? And of course, it depends on the field, right? So, but sometimes when somebody's nervous, there's the other opposite problem of they go through it in 25 minutes and they thought they have to speak for an hour or 50 minutes. That's a problem.
Yes. Sadly, there actually isn't a hard fast of how long does it take per slide, because I've been on this slide now for how many minutes? And then some of them we go right through. That's part of why rehearsing with your slides helps. The more you rehearse with your slides, the more I turn my little phone on with a timer and I'm going through the slides and I'm finding out. Now you do always want to leave some time for questions. I would rather have an extra 5 minutes at the end than going right up to the, and now there's no time for questions. Because then I'm really not serving my audience. If I don't get to answer what came up for you, I'm leaving you hanging. And that's a disservice. So personally, I would actually rather leave you with 5 extra minutes. Hey, bonus, especially folks, if you're ever speaking at one of those big conferences where they just cram people in time after time after time, giving them that extra 5 minutes, they will love you. Like, okay, we answered the questions. You guys are good to go. I don't have to keep you for that extra 5 minutes. You got an extra 5 minutes on that 15-minute break, and that could mean the world to me. But that is really where rehearsing with those slides comes in. Rehearse with them. And the more you rehearse, the less likely you are to rush through them, too, because your timing is on. You've got that timing down. Because yes, all of us are going to rush through or you get a little nervous, but the more you rehearse, the better you have that time. And as far as the number of slides, I have presentations with 100 in an hour. I think this one's about 15 in an hour. And I have presentations with 0 in an hour. Because, as I mentioned before, don't depend on your slides. And it depends on what I'm talking about. And does it need if it doesn't need a slide, don't do it. That was what I mentioned, remember when I had the one where we just talked about video and internet? That didn't need a slide that said internet. It just didn't need that. Especially because I'm not using my slide deck as my handout. That's when you get into kind of that. That's a great point to bring up. Anybody else? Yes?
Of the 2 aspect ratios, which one is the safest to use?
Oh, which one of the aspect ratios is the safest? It's funny because a lot of people these days say, oh, do 16.9 because everybody's got that, but they don't. 4.3 is the safest. 4:3 is the safest because it won't go off. It might look a little smaller on the screen, but it won't disappear off the screen if you're in a 4:3. And then there is also, we don't really talk about it much because it's only in great big fancy theaters. There actually is a thick 16:10 super extended now. But you're gonna know, if you're working on that, you've got a tech team with you and they're gonna help you get that set up. But I personally do 4:3 if I don't know, because I know it will not go off. So like for today, I asked for specifics, I didn't have the exact specifics. I knew this was not gonna run off the screen for you and would be okay. And yeah, if you're in with a group of, absolute video files, they're gonna complain, but I'm over it. Anybody else? Yes?
So I guess poster presentations instead of slideshows, so if you have one slide effectively. Do you have any, comments or advice for designing those posters or actually presenting to a small group of people with, again, only that one slide effectively?
So if we just have a poster presentation where it's one poster, the fold out, right? Like you have the fold out 3-fold or one poster, how do you design that? The key with that is figuring out what the largest size group you're going to be willing to talk to and making sure that every piece of that they can walk through with you. So again, you're not going to want to go to 14-point text. You're still going to want bigger text, images that show your ideas. You know, again, I mentioned this for charts. My scientists are my favorite because you guys have real charts, real diagrams, and those show up beautifully on that kind of thing. But that key is for you then decide if I'm working a table with a poster, how many people am I going to be willing or interested in engaging at that one time, and making sure that all of them can see it and that it's logical to them, that I can have a flow through it because I can't control it with a clicker, that I can have a flow through it that makes sense for my audience. Definitely in that case, do a rehearsal in front of some people. Put them up on that board and make sure that they are flowing through with you. Nice. Yes?
So I have a question on the technicalities of the interface. So some people use Macs, some people use PCs. Sometimes you're going to conference and you have no idea what the situation is going to be. And another problem between the Mac and the PC is that sometimes the settings are not the same. So when you're working together with a group of students, let's say, they send you files and everything is changed. I'm sure you've encountered this, but what do you recommend as a sort of a standardized system to minimize these problems?
Well, when you're coming to a place like this and you don't know what you're getting, first ask. One of the best things to do is ask wherever you're going, what are we going to have? What do you recommend? So what they had me do today, I'm a Mac person. Their PC. They had me, I brought it on a thumb drive. And I exported it from Mac to PowerPoint because I knew that's what they had. I always, as much as it's irritating if you have to use it, I always go ahead and export it as a PDF. Because you can pull up a PDF anywhere. Now you can't use the fancy little clickers with the PDF. It won't click through the way it does on the PowerPoint, but you at least can scroll a little, you can at least show your information. So I always do both. I recommend having one of those little flash drives with you at all times and having whatever presentation you have on it. Now, when you're working with a team, and some people are Mac and some people are PC, one of the things you want to do is make decisions on fonts, for example. Who has what font? Do we all have Verdana? Do we all have Helvetica? Do we all pick a font that everybody has? Because fonts are one of the big things that switch when you go between them, and then what happens is, if, for example, this was originally a PowerPoint. I'm part of a slide club, so I downloaded it, and when I pulled it into Mac, it said, you don't have X, Y, and Z. We replaced it with Verdana. Well, that's fine because it's just me. But if I had a team, depending on what version of Keynote, etc., somebody else might replace it with Calibri, somebody else might replace it with. So what we do as a team is we always decide on the fonts, what we're going to do with fonts, the sizes, setting our types. Is it a title? Is it a heading, etc.? Making sure that all of those are set the same, so that when it pulls it through and it sees that audience up there is a title, when it translates between the two, they both have that title as the same font, the same size, the same color.
Any recommendation on fonts?
All right, I'm not a designer. Obviously, don't use Comic Sans. Everybody knows don't use Comic Sans, right? I'm a big fan of Verdana and Calibri because almost everybody has them. They're very clean. They're clean, they're clear, they're easy to read. Don't go fancy. Don't do some little script that looks like, I don't know, a 17th century poet wrote it. Yeah. So that's what I like those two. Almost everybody's computer has them. Helvetica, some people love it, some people hate it. but that's another one that almost everybody has. But stay away from the fancy fonts and anything that is not going to come across to most people's computers. And for me, that's been the biggest when I've worked with multiple teams. Any other questions? All right, one more.
Okay. What about animation? So I think some people overuse it, and I personally don't like it very much. It's very distracting. But what's your opinion on the level of color use and animation?
Well, if we go back to working in teams, don't do it. If you've got a guy on a Mac and a guy on a PC and you're trying to match up animations, do not do it. You will pull your hair out. You will hate life in general. Right? So don't do that. If you're by yourself, don't go crazy with it. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. That's something I've always found with presentations. If it actually fits what you're doing, if actually a little guy running into the screen right here and doing something made sense, then have them do it. But bring it back to the content and make sure it makes sense. Because again, I think what happens, I don't know if younger people do it too much. I'm old, and we didn't have computers when I grew up. So when we first got computers and they had these things, we had to put every single thing in, you know? Like one of my slides would have the bullets come up. The next slide would have them fly in. The next slide would have them go up like lines. The next slide, be consistent if you are going to do that kind of thing. You know, be consistent in your presentations. But again, if you're doing it with people across platforms, I really don't recommend it because they very rarely match themselves. And there are some platforms, if you happen to be using one of the other platforms online that are slide creators that have animations, sometimes to get the animations to work, you have to be online. And remember, go back to rule 1 when I said never depend on the internet in a presentation, especially one that matters. You know, if you got one you're just doing for your friends, it's one thing. But if it matters, do not depend on the internet. You will not like your life. So, anybody else? So to wrap back up before we end, what I really hope each of you will do is, we know we're going to have to give a presentation at some point. Take that time, build the content, think about your speaking, your movement, and rehearse. I know it's a pain, it takes time, but do it. Because when you're done, you're going to have people come up and say to you, that's the best presentation you've ever given. And that at least feels good. And maybe if you do it right, you defend your thesis, you get a job, you get the funding, and really make a success of it going forward. I want to thank all of you for being here with me today.
All of you guys for attending. I hope you learned as much as I did. It was really great. We did have 2 sign-in sheets going around the room, so there was one for the chemistry department and one for the library. So if you didn't get a chance to sign those, please do that on your way out. I will try to stand here by one of the doors and have the clipboard with the sign sheets. But thank you guys all for attending. It was wonderful to see you. Thank you.